Hi everybody, welcome back to the channel. That montage that you just watched was finished a week after I posted my last video, and it's been a month since I posted that video. Since then, the only thing I've been able to do is locate the top hoop. So I thought I'd share the story of how it took 3 weeks for me to weld 4 pieces of steel to the jig. It all started on a cold night. It actually started because I had the bright idea to use plumb bobs to locate the top hoop to known locations on the frame rails. In the beginning, I spent a lot of time making sure the table is level in both directions, so I figured I'd take advantage of it. So I got on Amazon and bought 4 plumb bobs that I thought looked like this, but in actuality, got 4 plumb bobs that looked like this. The blunt point wasn't going to work for me, and I couldn't find any that were the correct shape that weren't very expensive. So I decided to turn them into this. And for a multitude of reasons, this failed. After a couple days of thinking, I asked myself, how can I come up with my own plumb bobs? I didn't want to have to wait another weekend to use my buddy's shop. I wanted to be able to work on these during the weeknights, and then it hit me. Why don't I 3D print them? After a week of trial and error, I was able to come up with 4 decently heavy plumb bobs that I was able to fill with sand. Those threads are 3D printed. They thread together with no post-machining needed. The CG was nice and low near the tip. The hole for the thread was very small, so it came out of the center of the cap, and it didn't wobble when it spun. Back in the shop the next weekend, the first thing to do was find the center line of the top hoop. While I was at it, I measured the corner distance and flatness. To my joy, it was parallel, square, and flat to 0.5 millimeters. During the last video, I marked the center line and a couple points to locate the back hoop. All I had to do was line up the 4 points and then I could tack it in. My methodology was to line up the 2 center points and then one of the longitudinal points, and if the 4th point lined up, it was in the correct location. Nope, I could only get 3 points lined up. I just measured the hoop, so I knew that was true, square, and properly marked, which meant that it was in the bottom rails. And it was either the center line that I marked wrong, or the longitudinal lines that I marked wrong. Or both. The only real option I had was to remark the center line and remark the longitudinal lines. But with my 3D printer, I just had to make some simple center line finders, and all will be great. Instead, I decided to be creative and make something with aluminum from the local home store. And as you might have guessed, that failed. So I admitted defeat, called up my local metal supplier, which I should have done first, and ordered some 1/2-inch aluminum tubes and 3/8 inch aluminum rod. The 3D printed parts slid over the 1/2-inch rod, and then the 3/8 rod stuck out perpendicular to that, and then you could fit different tips onto the 3/8 rod. For the frame, I needed 24mm, 60mm, and 70mm pucks. And you'll notice that the 60 and 70mm are triangle shaped, and that's a limitation on the width that I could print. And the reason they're wrapped in electrical tape is because the diameter's printed a little small, and I used the tape to fill the gap. The first step was to find the center of the front cab mounts. The top of each slide body had a slot printed in it, and that allowed me to hook a tape measure to it. So I measured the distance from slot to slot, halved it, marked the center with a scribe, and then I used my small machinist square to translate that location to the center line on the frame. The second step was to find the center line of the rear cab mount. For these locations, I had to use the 70mm pucks and then tape the weighted line to the center line since I couldn't mark it on the frame anywhere. The third step was to find the center line on the mid cab mount. This is a repeat of the rear cab mount, but with the 60mm pucks, and again, I just hung a weighted line off of the center that I marked. With all of that done, the real test is next. If the frame is parallel, I can tie a line to the front center line, line it up with the rear center line, and then the mid center line will just touch the line. To my relief, all 3 points lined up perfectly. With the center line validated, it's time to extend it all the way back to the rear. And this is where the first reward of my journey pays off. The old center line was 6 millimeters off of where the new one is. In the scheme of things, that probably isn't a big deal, but future me would have been scratching his head trying to figure out why the passenger side gap between the bed and the body is a 1/4 inch more than the driver's side. With the center line now properly defined, the last step is to remark the longitudinal lines. I laid a piece of aluminum box tubing on the new center line, pulled out my trusty square and my tape measure, and remeasured the mark I had previously made. Surprisingly, it measured the same. The last step was to remark the longitudinal point on the other side. And this is where the second reward paid off. The mark was off 3 millimeters in the correct direction. With all the old marks ground off and the high level of confidence in the new marks, it was time to locate the top hoop again. I dropped 3 of the plumb bobs back down and lined them up with the corresponding marks. And to be honest, I was a little nervous dropping the 4th plumb bob down. Would it line up? I'll let the video speak to this. That was much harder than I expected, but I'm really happy with how everything turned out. This video style was a little bit different. It was really hard recording what was going on throughout because I kept on failing and changing directions, but it was fun to try this. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comment section below. With that said, the top hoop is finally in place, which means we can move on to adding the bracing and then all the mounting locations for the frame brackets. But we're gonna leave that for the next time. I'm gonna end the video here. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye guys.